Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a new art technique, to me anyway, called ink resist. I'm going to start out by using watercolor paper, putting some water-soluble items underneath there, letting it all dry, and then covering the whole thing with India ink. This is a little bit of mystery and surprise to the end of this technique. I'm hoping you're going to find it just as interesting as I did. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. We have a host today, Jeanie with Jeanie's Palette, and I'm the special guest host, and I got to choose the topic of use something, an art material or art supplies that you're not used to using, and that's why I'm trying this new technique. Well, I can't wait to share with you the mystery and surprise of this ink resist technique. I'm going to be working on watercolor for this process. I'm using a 140-pound watercolor, the Canson brand. It's one I use all the time, and I really like the texture of this one. I'm also going to be using some tempera paint that I just bought at my local Dollar General store. I have a set of inexpensive gouache colors, and I was also going to be trying watercolor, and I'm just using what I have in my studio. The theory behind this technique is starting out with water-soluble items first, and I'm using tempera paint as my first base coat here. And then once all of that dries, I'm going to be putting an India ink over the top. Where there's parts of the paper poking through and actually intentionally leaving areas that have no tempera paint on them, those areas will be a rich dark black from the India ink that I put over the top. It kind of reminds me of block printing, where you have irregular shapes of black. They're not perfectly straight lines, and it adds a very interesting quality. I was super surprised at how this tempera paint, white tempera paint, with ink over it, with some scratching into it as well, turned out rather beautiful. I really liked this one. It was a favorite. I put little white circles inside of my circles as well. You need to be careful that you don't cover your whole item with all of the tempera paint. You do want to have some little bits of paper showing through to absorb the ink strongly. Here I took a stylus and I went ahead and I decided that I was going to go and do some scratching inside of there, or the fancy word is sgraffito. I was going to be taking it and scratching in another bit of circle just to add a little bit more interest to it. I also, when I do the background, I'm filling it in with tempera paint, kind of sorta, thick and thin. Where the thinner areas are, you might get dusting colors of the black India ink, and where it's more thick, it's going to be completely white. And also, where there's nothing at all, it's going to be a bright, not bright, but dark color of black. I swish it back and forth, trying to make irregular areas. I do try to leave a little bit of white around of those circles, so it will help pop it out, so there will be more of a black circle around my circle. I'm hoping this all makes sense. It's going to make more sense at the very end, so hang in with me as we do the process. I'm going to put a layer of this all over the back, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my stylus and I'm going to do some writing in that background. I forget what it's called. It's like non-script writing, where it looks like script but you can't really read it, so a non-legible print. You can see here how much I've actually put on my paper, so you can see it's a thick and thin process. And this is when I decide I was going to go ahead and add a little bit of writing. This was all just a big grand experiment. Like I said, I've never done it before, and so I wanted to kind of try a few more things to see what might be what might pop up, what might be a total accident, what could be really interesting in the end. The next one I wanted to try was using watercolor. I had watched a few videos, but I hadn't seen anybody use watercolor, so I thought I wanted to give it a try, knowing that watercolor can stain paper and it is water soluble. So I decided to go ahead and mix a dark color using a variety of browns and make more of like a seed grass look to it. I like that look of that organic feel, and I thought this would make an interesting composition to go ahead and give a try. You're going to notice me here using browns, but in the final video towards the end when I'm washing off the ink, you're going to notice that you'll see some purple, and that's because I thought I had the video camera filming and I really didn't. So I had to redo it and do another one, but that's fine because I learned something new every time I did it. On this one, I particularly learned this was a different type of watercolor paper. This was a watercolor paper that had a little bit more bump in it. and I didn't like it as well as I did the smoother paper. So your paper underneath does make a difference. You definitely don't want to use a paper that is 100% cotton because you're going to be running water over it and rubbing the surface, and that much cotton is going to absorb too much, and you're probably going to actually deteriorate the paper too much. So actually using the 140-pound weight with a little bit more student grade quality to it, it's going to work better for this technique. This particular painting, I let it all dry, and then I took my tempera paint and I added that to the background. And I thought I was going to do kind of trying to get in between, leaving a little bit dark spaces in between there. And as I went along, I realized I just don't have the patience to do that. So I ended up actually doing more all over painting on top of the watercolor using the tempera paint. And it actually turned out very interesting because the tempera paint doesn't hold on as tight. So I was still able to get an interesting look. The watercolor didn't wash all the way off, even having the tempera paint on top of it. And I was able to go ahead and just kind of do more of a thick and thin of the tempera paint, and that allowed different areas to go darker with the black than other areas did. Here I just have kind of given up and I've decided I'm going to go all over everything. But I wanted to use that scratching technique, so I took the tool again, the stylus, and I scratched over the watercolor areas inside of there. You do have to be a little bit of aware of what you're doing with your scratching. My very first time, I thought I had a funny face or a kind of a smile face inside of there, and I didn't care for that. So I needed to be a little bit more mindful in some of those areas, especially with the dark underneath it, what my scratching technique might look like. So here you can see me just going right on in and putting the tempera paint kind of just here and there, but I still need to make sure I do have some plain paper that's not being covered, because otherwise it won't have that really rich dark quality in the end. I'm going to go right over that flower. You can see my hand going random which direction, so I'm getting thick and thin paint on, and then I'll come back in with that stylus and do a little bit more scratching technique over the top. Technically, I'm probably damaging the paper by going ahead and scratching, but that's a technique too that you can use in watercolor, and I have used it different times to make the paint go deeper down into your paper. So I thought this might work really well for this technique too, that you could go ahead and put something over the top and scratch into it and get those really dark lines to pop out. I can't wait to show you in the end. I'm so excited about this process. It's just like a bit of mystery and a surprise. You don't really know what you're going to get until the very end, which may drive some people crazy, but not knowing exactly what you're going to end up with. But that's just the risk. It's just the process of doing this. For my last painting, I was going to be painting an image using some gouache paint, and gouache is basically watercolor with Arabic gum added to it, which makes it very opaque and it dries super flat. When doing this process, I had to be very mindful because the color you're going to see is only on the first stroke. So if I wanted a varied color, I needed to make sure I put the brightest, lightest color on first and then layered my next layers over the top. I'm not going to see a blend of colors like you normally do when you do acrylic paint. I can go over this with multiple layers, but you're not going to see it. You're only going to see the first stain color that you put on. So when I did some of these, the flowers in particular, I would do a stroke of orange and then do a stroke of red, perhaps a stroke of pink, depending. I can't remember if I used pink or not. I think I did. But I would make sure I was being mindful that if I wanted to see a different color besides just one, I needed to have those colors on in little slices of areas. I'm hoping that makes sense when you think about it. It was a little bit of a mind trick to stop and think about where I was putting my colors, how I was putting them on. It was a totally opposite way of thinking with painting. I'm still going to do a little bit of this scratching technique. In the end, I wish I had left a little bit more dark space. I got a little overzealous and probably lost track of where my lines were, especially around my items. I should have left a little bit more black on this one. But again, it's all a learning curve and you're going to learn something. So you can see how I'm filling in my background. I could have went exactly right over all the way around those on top of those polka dots actually, and you wouldn't see the lightest color anymore. But if I did that, if I went completely over everything, there wouldn't be any room for black, and I wanted some black to be shown here. Here's a good example of putting a light color on first of the little kind of a dot pattern in my bird. I'm going to put those little dots on, and then I'm going to let them dry, and I'll come back and put another color over the top. With this one, take note of how dark these colors are. It's going to change a lot when I rinse those colors off. You might actually, I was surprised at how much actually rinsed off. So the colors I'm seeing now and the intensity I'm seeing now is not even close to what I'm going to end up with. Now this may be because I'm just using an inexpensive set of gouache, or it could just be that's how it works. I'm really not for sure because I don't have a ton of experience with this, but it was very interesting how much actually washed off in the end. So now I'm putting that next layer over my polka dots, and so I should be able to see those very light dots underneath and then that next color blocking it out. I decided to go ahead and create a border on this one all the way around the edges. So I did every other block, and I wanted to have one a very solid black rich ink color. So I left that completely open. And then I did that checker pattern all the way around. But in the checker pattern, I did end up using that stylus again and scratching in a little bit of pattern. I didn't want it to be a solid white. I did notice on my gouache color, there were two different types of white inside of there. One was just a regular white, and the other one said titanium white. The titanium white is a lot more opaque, so if you're looking for something more opaque, use the titanium one if you have it in your set. I gave my pieces about 2 hours to dry before I put the ink over the top. You're going to want to use a waterproof India ink for this process, and you're going to want a soft nylon bristle brush to go over the top to apply the ink. That's going to help so that you don't have a lot of stripiness in the ink, where you don't see the bands of the ink going across. You also want to wear gloves. India ink's going to stain your hands if you get it on there. Ask me how I know. I was terrible about remembering to put those gloves on. When you put the ink on, you're going to want to start from one side and then go all the way across to the other side. You want to be generous with your ink. If you go too light, you're going to end up with a lot of gray instead of being black. And at this point, I was noticing that my pulls, when I did it, the ink was always thicker where I started and thinner where I ended. So I decided I would try it where I went two different directions. Go one stroke one way and then do the opposite on the other way. Here I'm just showing you, you can tell that ink is wet. It's going to look wet and shiny. And when it dries, it should be more matte. You might notice a few areas that look like they're still wet, but they actually dry. It's from the raised areas underneath. I did allow my pieces to dry overnight before I washed them in my sink. I wanted to say a special thank you to Jeanie for hosting today's collaboration. You're going to find the link to her channel inside of the description box, as well as a playlist of all the other artists who have contributed videos for today's challenge. You definitely want to take some time, check out their channels. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to find some other fun art ideas. Well, now it's time to do the big reveal. I'm going to be washing it off in warm water and just gently kind of scrubbing it. I did notice that the tempera paint was a little bit slippery underneath there. I was kind of surprised by that. And it's a big mystery. You really don't know what you're going to get until this final step. I washed my pieces off in a utility sink. I was a little nervous about the ink perhaps staining my sink, but it really didn't. Another option you could do is use like a small shallow dish pan of water and go ahead and rinse your piece off there. The idea is to get in, lightly scrub, and be done. The more you scrub your paper, the higher chance you have to damage it. So get in there, just scrub it off, and then be done. But I really love the way the textures are popping on this particular piece. This was the one I did with the inexpensive tempera paint and just black, and it was really one of my favorites. I love seeing all the details. If you made it this far, I wanted to mention you can grab a tracer for that bird picture I painted. I'll leave the link inside of the description box. It's free for you to grab if you would like to go ahead and use that tracer, not only to create this style, but any other style that you would like to paint. And this is the gouache painting, and you can see how much the colors have really faded. No longer is it those dark, rich tones. It's really faded to being more kind of in that pastel family. I'm going to be painting over it with watercolor and adding another layer back to it. I guess that's a very common way that they do this process. is add some watercolor on the top. Here's a close-up of what they look like dried. This is before I add the watercolor to it. And you can see the rich detail. I was super happy that I didn't have a bunch of bands of the black ink going across. You didn't see that patterns, but I love the detail that's popping, and I really do think they look like block prints. Here's what they look like in my studio, sitting in some simple frames. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. If you've already subscribed to my channel, make sure you click that bell so you get notifications of any new videos I might put up. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know what you think about this art technique. If you enjoyed watching these pieces be created, here's a couple more videos you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again. And next time, you might create right along with me.